Here is the dramatic storytelling script for your YouTube video. Note on length. Writing 8,000 words in a single response is technically impossible due to output limitations. To ensure the story maintains high quality and suspense without getting cut off, I have broken this down into parts as requested. Below is the opening hook, Part 1 and Part 2. After you read these, I can continue with, "They called her a leech. They called her a failure." Inside the suffocating walls of the majestic Superior Court of Seattle, Mark and his ruthless lawyer thought they had won before the trial even began. They mocked his ex-wife, Elena, for her worn-out shoes and silence, demanding she pay him despite claiming she had nothing. But Mark made one fatal calculation. He judged a book by its cover. He didn't know that the woman sitting quietly at the defendant's table wasn't just unemployed. She was the silent owner of the very conglomerate he was trying to impress. Watch closely, because when the judge reads the final asset document, the silence in that courtroom becomes deafening. This is the story of the ultimate karmic slap. The mahogany doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a heavy creak, admitting the stagnant air of tension that always seemed to precede a high-stakes divorce hearing. But for Mark Dameron, this wasn't high stakes. This was a victory lap. Mark adjusted his silk tie, a ridiculously expensive piece of Italian fabric he'd bought specifically for this day. He glanced at his reflection in the glass partition. At 34, he was the picture of corporate success, or at least the picture of someone desperate to look the part. He was a mid-level executive at Vanguard Tech, a job he bragged about incessantly, though his credit card debt told a different story. Sitting beside him was his lawyer, Arthur Sterling. Sterling was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man known for tearing vulnerable spouses apart for sport. He was currently scrolling through his phone, looking bored. "Don't worry, Mark," Sterling whispered, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "We'll have her out of here in 20 minutes. The judge hates deadbeats." And looking at her, he gestured vaguely across the aisle. "She's the definition of one." On the other side of the aisle sat Elena. She looked small in the massive oak chair. She was wearing a simple grey blouse and black slacks that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. There was no jewelry on her hands, no designer bag at her feet, just a battered leather satchel that looked like it had survived a war zone. She sat alone. No high-priced legal team. No entourage. She had chosen to represent herself, a move that Mark had laughed about for 3 days straight. "She's delusional," Mark had told his new fiancée, Chloe, just that morning. "She thinks she can stand up to Sterling. She couldn't even pick a restaurant for dinner without asking my opinion." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. All rise for the Honourable Judge Blackwell. Judge Blackwell was a stern woman, with eyes that could cut glass. She didn't tolerate nonsense, and she certainly didn't tolerate theatrics. She took her seat, shuffled the mountain of paperwork in front of her, and peered over her spectacles. "Case number 429204, she read in a monotone voice. "Dameron versus Dameron, asset division and alimony hearing." Sterling stood up immediately, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor, we are ready to proceed. My client, Mr. Dameron, is seeking an immediate dissolution of financial ties, and frankly, we are requesting spousal support from Mrs. Dameron." A ripple of confusion went through the few spectators in the back. Mark was the one with the flashy job and the BMW. Elena was the one who looked like she took the bus. Judge Blackwell raised an eyebrow. "Spousal support, Mr. Sterling? From the defendant? The financial affidavits submitted suggest Mrs. Dameron has been unemployed for the last 3 years." "Unemployed by choice, Your Honor," Sterling sneered, turning to look at Elena with a look of pure disdain. Mrs. Dameron has spent the entirety of their 5-year marriage leeching off my client's hard work. She refused to seek employment, refused to contribute to the household, and now my client is drowning in debt trying to maintain the lifestyle she demanded. We believe she has hidden assets, or at the very least, the capacity to earn. We want to impute an income to her and demand she pay restitution for the emotional and financial drain she caused. Mark smirked. He leaned forward, whispering loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Maybe you can get a job scrubbing floors, Elle. You were always good at cleaning up my messes. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't look at Mark. She didn't look at Sterling. She stared straight ahead at the judge, her face an unreadable mask of calm. Mrs. Dameron, Judge Blackwell said, her voice softening slightly, perhaps out of pity. Do you have a response to these claims? Elena stood up slowly. Her movement was graceful, precise. I do, Your Honor. But I would like to wait until Mr. Sterling has finished presenting his fiction. Sterling laughed, a short, barking sound. Fiction. The only fiction here is your resume, Elena. Your Honor, look at her. She's wearing shoes from a discount bin. She's playing the victim to garner sympathy. We have witnesses who will testify to her laziness. Call your first witness, the judge sighed, clearly already tired of Sterling's aggression. Sterling pointed to the back of the room. I call Chloe Miller to the stand. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. Chloe, Mark's mistress, now fiancée. The woman Mark had moved into their shared home before Elena had even finished packing her boxes. Chloe strutted to the stand, flipping her blonde extensions. She swore in, looking at Mark with a sickeningly sweet smile. Ms. Miller, Sterling began, pacing the floor. You know the defendant? Unfortunately, Chloe giggled. She was still living in Mark's house when we met. It was sad, really. She would just sit in the study all day, staring at an old laptop. Mark would come home exhausted from Vanguard Tech, and she wouldn't even have dinner ready. She just took his money and bought. Well, I don't know what she bought. Certainly not nice clothes. So, in your opinion, she contributed nothing? Absolutely nothing, Chloe stated firmly. She was a ghost, a parasite. Mark nodded vigorously, playing the part of the victimized husband perfectly. He remembered those days. Elena locked in the study, always typing, always researching. He had assumed she was writing a diary or playing games. He never asked. He didn't care. As long as the house was clean and he looked good, Elena was just furniture. Thank you, Ms. Miller, Sterling said. He turned to Elena. Your witness? Elena walked toward the witness stand. She didn't hold any papers. She just looked at Chloe. Ms. Miller, Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady, a low alto that carried to the back of the room. You stated that I sat in the study all day staring at an old laptop. Did you ever see the screen? Chloe blinked. What? No, I didn't care what you were doing. So you don't know if I was playing solitaire or managing a portfolio? Chloe laughed, and Mark joined in. Portfolio? You? Chloe scoffed. Honey, you couldn't afford a portfolio of drawings, let alone stocks. Mark paid for the electricity that powered that laptop. No further questions, Elena said, turning back to her table. Mark leaned over to Sterling. See? She's got nothing. She's folding. Watch this, Sterling whispered. I'm going to bury her. Sterling stood up again. Your Honor, we demand that Mrs. Dameron pay $5,000 a month in alimony. We know she's hiding something. Nobody lives on nothing. And if she can't pay, we want a lien on any future earnings she makes once she finally gets a minimum wage job. The humiliation was total. They weren't just divorcing her. They were trying to enslave her future. They wanted to make sure that even after she left, she would still belong to Mark's debt. Judge Blackwell looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Dameron, it is your turn to present your case. You disputed the plaintiff's claims. Do you have evidence?" Eleanor stood up. She reached into her battered leather satchel. The room went silent. Mark watched, expecting her to pull out a crumpled tissue or a handwritten plea for mercy. Instead, she pulled out a single, thick blue folder with a gold seal on the front. "I do, Your Honor," Elena said. "I have quite a bit of evidence. But first, I'd like to call a witness of my own." Sterling rolled his eyes. "Who? Her cat?" Elena turned to the back of the courtroom. "I call Mr. Harrison Thorne to the stand." The air in the room shifted instantly. Mark froze. The name sounded familiar. Harrison Thorne. Where had he heard that? The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a charcoal suit walked in. He didn't just walk, he glided. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and an aura of immense, crushing power. He carried a briefcase that likely cost more than Mark's car. Sterling's jaw dropped. He recognized the man. Every lawyer in the state recognized him. Harrison Thorne was the chief legal officer for Apex Global, the largest venture capital firm on the West Coast. A man who didn't step foot in family court. A man who dealt with billion-dollar mergers, not alimony disputes. "Objection," Sterling stammered, standing up too quickly. "Relevance? Mr. Thorne has nothing to do with this case." Judge Blackwell looked intrigued. "Overruled. I want to hear this. Mr. Thorne, please take the stand." As Harrison Thorne walked past the defense table, he did something that made Mark's blood run cold. He stopped, turned to Elena, and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep, subservient respect. "Good morning, ma'am," Thorne said to Eleanor. "Good morning, Harrison," Eleanor replied softly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Mark felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. Why was the CLO of Apex Global bowing to his unemployed ex-wife? The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys, eyes fixed on Harrison Thorne. Thorne took the stand, adjusting his glasses. He looked out of place in the dingy family courtroom, like a lion forced to sit in a kennel. Elena remained at her table, standing tall. "Mr. Thorne, for the record, please state your current occupation." "I am the Chief Legal Officer and Senior Vice President of Operations for Apex Global Holdings," Thorne said, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. "And how do you know the plaintiff, Mark Dameron?" Elena asked. Thorne turned his gaze toward Mark. It wasn't a friendly look. It was the look a biologist gives a particularly uninteresting insect. "I do not know him personally. However, I am aware that he is a mid-level account manager at Vanguard Tech." "And Vanguard Tech," Elena continued, "what is its relationship to Apex Global?" "Vanguard Tech is a subsidiary," Thorne stated. "Apex Global acquired Vanguard 3 years ago. We own 85% of their controlling stock." Mark blinked. He knew Vanguard had been bought out, but he never paid attention to the parent company details. He just cashed the checks. "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, her voice sharpening, "who authorized the acquisition of Vanguard Tech?" "The chairman of the board of Apex Global," Thorne replied. "And who," Elena asked, locking eyes with Mark, "is the chairman of the board?" Sterling jumped up. "Objection. This is irrelevant. We are here to discuss Mrs. Dameron's lack of income, not corporate structures." "It is entirely relevant to my income, Your Honor," Elena cut in, her voice icy. "Overruled," Judge Blackwell said, leaning forward. "Answer the question, Mr. Thorne." Thorne took a breath. "The chairman of the board, the majority shareholder, and the founder of Apex Global, is the woman standing right there, Mrs. Elena Vance Dameron. Mark felt the world tilt on its axis. A high-pitched ringing started in his ears. "What?" he whispered. Sterling froze, his mouth half open. That's impossible. She's a housewife." "She is a silent partner," Thorne corrected, his tone biting. "Mrs. Dameron founded Apex Global 10 years ago, using a pseudonym to protect her privacy. She built the algorithm that predicts market trends, the very algorithm Vanguard Tech uses today. While you, Mr. Dameron, were working your exhausting 9 to 5, Mrs. Dameron was managing a portfolio worth $4.2 billion from her study." "Billion?" The judge's eyes widened. "With a B, Your Honor," Thorne confirmed. Mark looked at Elena, really looked at her. For the first time, he noticed that her battered satchel was actually a vintage piece, rare leather, likely worth thousands to a collector. He noticed that her silence wasn't submission. It was the patience of a predator watching prey. "No," Mark stammered, standing up. "No, this is a lie. She asked me for grocery money last week. Why would a billionaire ask for $50 for groceries?" Elena finally turned to face him. Her expression was pitying. "Because, Mark," she said softly, "I wanted to see if you would give it to me. I wanted to see if, after 5 years of marriage, you had any kindness left in you. You didn't. You threw a 20 at me and told me to buy store-brand pasta because I wasn't earning my keep." "You deceived me," Mark shouted, his face turning red. "This is fraud, marriage fraud. She hid assets. I'm entitled to half. I'm entitled to half of everything." Sterling seemed to wake up from his shock, the smell of money reviving him. "Yes, Your Honor. If she has billions, this is a community property state. My client is entitled to 50% of Apex Global." Elena smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Actually," Elena said, picking up the blue folder, "that brings me to Exhibit B." She walked toward the judge, handing over a document. "Before Mark and I got married," Elena explained to the room, "I was already worth $300 million. I was young, but I wasn't stupid. I loved Mark, or I thought I did. But I knew money changes people. So I protected myself." "A prenup?" Sterling scoffed. "We never signed a prenup. I would remember signing a prenup." "You did sign it, Mark," Elena said. "Do you remember the day before our wedding? You were hungover from your bachelor party. You were rushing to get to the rehearsal dinner. I handed you a stack of papers, vendor contracts, catering bills, the marriage license application. You were complaining about how much paperwork there was. You signed every single page without reading a word." Mark's face went pale. He remembered. He had just scribbled his signature over and over, joking that he was signing his life away. "Page 4, Elena said to the judge. "The spousal waiver of assets and independent property agreement. Not only does it state that what is mine remains mine, but it also has a fidelity clause." "A fidelity clause?" Judge Blackwell read the document, her eyebrows climbing into her hairline. "Yes," Elena said. "It states that if either party commits adultery, any claim to the other's assets, even those acquired during the marriage, is voided. And furthermore, the cheating spouse agrees to pay a penalty for wasted time." Elena turned to Chloe, who was shrinking into her seat. "And thanks to Ms. Miller's testimony earlier," Elena said sweetly, "we have established on public record that Mark moved her in before our marriage was dissolved. That is adultery." "This is entrapment," Mark screamed. "You set me up." "I set you up?" Elena laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Mark, I stayed in that house for 3 years while you belittled me. I cooked your meals while you texted her under the dinner table. I washed your clothes while you came home smelling like her perfume. I gave you 1,000 chances to be a decent man. I didn't set you up. I just let you be yourself." Elena turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, according to the contract Mark signed, he owes me a lump sum of $500,000 for breach of contract. However—" She paused, looking at Mark's terrified face. "I don't need his money. I have plenty. I am willing to waive the fee. But I have one condition." "What condition?" Judge Blackwell asked. "I want him to resign," Elena said, "from Vanguard Tech, immediately." "You can't do that," Mark yelled. "That's my career, that's my life." "Vanguard Tech is my company, Mark," Elena replied, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent room. "And I don't hire people who treat their partners like garbage. You're fired." The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Judge Blackwell banged her gavel, but the sound was swallowed by the murmurs of the gallery. Mark stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Fired? By his ex-wife? The woman he had mocked for coupon clipping just yesterday. "Order," Judge Blackwell commanded. "Mr. Sterling, control your client. Mrs. Dameron has presented compelling evidence. Unless you have a counter-argument that doesn't involve shouting, we are done here." Sterling, pale and sweating, grabbed Mark's arm and dragged him into the hallway. The heavy oak doors swung shut, muffling the noise inside. "You said she was broke," Sterling hissed, shoving Mark against the wall. "You said she was a nobody. I'm going up against Apex Global, Mark. Do you know what they do to lawyers like me? They disbar them for sport." "I didn't know," Mark hyperventilated, loosening his tie. "She never acted rich. She drove a 10-year-old Honda. She fixed her own clothes." "That's called stealth wealth, you idiot," Sterling spat. "And now she's got you on a fidelity clause, and she's your boss. You're done. I'm dropping you." "No." Mark grabbed Sterling's lapel. "You can't leave me. If I lose this, I lose everything. My job, my house, my reputation. Chloe will leave me before I even get to the car." Sterling paused, his eyes narrowing. He was a shark, and sharks didn't like losing, even when the odds were impossible. "There might be one way, but it's dirty, and it's expensive." "I don't care," Mark said, desperation clawing at his throat. "Do whatever it takes." "The prenup," Sterling muttered, pacing the marble floor. "If we can prove you signed it under duress, or that she committed fraud by using a pseudonym for her business dealings without disclosing it to you, we might void the contract. But we need muscle, legal muscle. Someone who scares Judge Blackwell." Mark's eyes lit up. "My uncle Silas." Sterling stopped. "Silas Dameron, the disgraced appellate judge?" "He still has friends," Mark said. "He knows where all the bodies are buried in this town. He hates Eleanor. He always said she was too smart for her own good. If I call him, he'll come." An hour later, the atmosphere in the courthouse cafeteria was thick with tension. Elena sat at a small corner table, sipping a black coffee. Harrison Thorne stood by her side like a sentinel, checking emails on his tablet. "The board is amused by your performance, Mrs. Vance," Thorne murmured, "though they are concerned about the publicity." "Let them be concerned," Elena said calmly. "I'm cleaning house, Harrison, personal and professional." Suddenly, a shadow fell over the table. Elena didn't look up. "Hello, Silas. I smell the cigars and cheap cologne from here." Silas Dameron was a large man, built like a bulldog, with a face reddened by years of scotch and anger. He leaned heavily on a cane, though rumor had it he used it more as a weapon than a support. Mark and Sterling stood behind him, looking like scared children hiding behind a bully. "You've grown a sharp tongue, Elena," Silas rumbled. He pulled out a chair without asking and sat down. The wood creaked under his weight. "And you've grown bold, showing your face in a courthouse after what happened in '98, Elena countered, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were steel. Silas chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "Old history. I'm here as a family advisor. Mark tells me you're trying to ruin him." "Mark ruined himself," Elena said, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm just processing the paperwork." "Now listen here." Silas leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You think because you stumbled into some money you can play God? That prenup? It's garbage." "Is it?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "It is," Silas insisted. "You signed it as Elena Vance, but on your marriage license, you're Elena Dameron. And on your business documents, your EV holdings. That's identity fraud. You misrepresented yourself to entrap my nephew. If we go back in there and tell Judge Blackwell that the CEO of Apex Global has been operating under false pretenses, she'll annul the prenup faster than you can blink. And then, Mark gets half of the billions." Mark stepped forward, emboldened by his uncle's presence. "That's right, El. You lied to me. You lied to everyone. We'll sue you for fraud. We'll drag your precious company through the mud. The stock prices will tank." Sterling chimed in, finding his courage. "We'll paint you as a corporate predator who preys on innocent husbands. The media will eat it up. The billionaire Black Widow." How does that sound? Elena placed her coffee cup down. The ceramic made a sharp clink on the table. She looked at the three men, the greedy ex-husband, the sleazy lawyer, and the corrupt uncle. "Is that your play?" she asked softly. "Blackmail?" "It's not blackmail," Silas grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "It's leverage. You drop the fidelity clause, you reinstate Mark at Vanguard with a raise, make him VP, and you pay him a $10 million settlement for emotional distress. Do that, and we walk away." Mark smirked. "And I want the house, and the dog." Elena looked at Harrison Thorne. "Harrison, did you get that?" Thorne tapped his lapel. "Recorded clearly, ma'am. Audio and video." Silas's smile faltered. "What?" Elena pointed to the small, inconspicuous pin on Thorne's jacket. It was a camera lens. "You see, Silas," Elena said, leaning forward, her voice suddenly devoid of any warmth. "I didn't become a billionaire by being lucky. I became one by being prepared. You just attempted to extort a corporate officer in a federal building. That's a felony." "You're bluffing," Silas spat, though sweat was starting to bead on his forehead. "You can't record me without consent." "Actually," Elena corrected, "this is a public cafeteria. No expectation of privacy. And Washington is a one-party consent state for video in public areas regarding security. But that's not the only thing I have." She reached into her satchel again. This time, she didn't pull out a folder. She pulled out a tablet. Elena tapped the screen and slid the tablet across the table toward Silas. "You mentioned '98, Elena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The year you were forced to retire from the bench. Everyone thought it was just a health issue. But we both know the truth, don't we?" Silas stared at the screen. His face went from red to a ghostly white. On the screen was a scanned document, an old bank transfer record from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was dated May 1998. The beneficiary, Silas Dameron. The sender, the Moretti crime family. "I have the rest of the file, Silas," Elena said pleasantly. "The bribes you took to dismiss charges against trafficking rings. The evidence you lost in the archive room. I bought the bank that held these records 2 years ago. I own your secrets." Mark looked at his uncle. "Uncle Silas, what is she talking about?" Silas didn't answer. He was trembling, His cane rattled against the floor. "If you proceed with this fraud claim," Elena continued, "I will release this file to the FBI, the IRS, and the Seattle Times. You won't just lose your pension, Silas. You'll die in prison." Silas stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. I have to go." "Uncle Silas," Mark grabbed his arm. "You can't leave. You're supposed to fix this." "Let go of me, you fool." Silas shoved Mark away with surprising strength. "She's not a woman, she's a monster. You're on your own." Silas hobbled away as fast as his legs could carry him, not looking back. Sterling, realizing the ship was sinking, slowly backed away. I need to consult with my partners. I'll be in the hallway." He fled, leaving Mark alone at the table. Mark stood there, stripped of his lawyer, his uncle, and his dignity. He looked at Elena, his eyes welling with angry tears. "Why?" Mark whispered. "Why go this far? You could have just divorced me. Why destroy me?" Elena stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she towered over him. "I didn't destroy you, Mark. I gave you a test." "A test?" "Vanguard Tech," Elena said. "Do you know why you got that job?" "Because I'm a good salesman," Mark insisted. "I broke records." "You got the job because I ordered HR to hire you," Elena revealed. "And the records you broke, those were dummy accounts. I funneled Apex money into your sector to make you look successful. I wanted to see if success would make you confident, or if it would make you arrogant." Mark's mouth fell open. His entire career, his identity, was a fabrication. "I wanted to see if you would share your success with me," Elena continued, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "I wanted to see if, when you got a bonus, you'd buy me a nice dinner or if you'd hide it. I wanted to see if you'd treat your wife with respect when you thought you were the big man." She stepped closer. "You failed, Mark. You took the money I gave you and used it to buy gifts for Chloe. You took the confidence I gave you and used it to belittle me. You didn't build a career. You just played in a sandbox I built for you. And now, playtime is over." Elena signaled to Harrison. "Let's go finish this." She walked back toward the courtroom doors. Mark stood paralyzed in the cafeteria, the noise of the lunch crowd rising around him, realizing he was a pauper standing in the ruins of a castle he never actually owned. Back in the courtroom, the mood had shifted from curiosity to reverence. When Eleanor walked in, the bailiff actually held the gate open for her. Judge Blackwell looked down at the empty defense table where Sterling should have been. "Mr. Dameron," the judge said, as Mark stumbled back in, alone. "Where is your counsel?" He had a conflict of interest," Mark mumbled, sinking into his chair. "I see," Blackwell said. She looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Dameron, does the defense rest?" "Not yet, Your Honor," Eleanor said. "I have one final witness, and this one isn't here to prove my wealth. She's here to prove his character." Mark looked up, terrified. Who else could there be? "I call Mrs. Teresa Dameron to the stand," Elena announced. Mark's head snapped back. "Mum!" The doors opened, and an elderly woman in a wheelchair was wheeled in by a nurse. It was Mark's mother. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp. Mark hadn't visited her in the nursing home in 2 years, claiming he was too busy with work. "Mum?" Mark stood up. "What are you doing here?" Teresa Dameron ignored her son. She looked at Elena, with tears in her eyes. "Hello, darling." "Hello, Teresa," Elena said gently. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Mark claims he is in debt because he was supporting me. I would like his mother to testify as to where Mark's money actually went." Teresa took the oath, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Dameron," Elena asked, "who pays for your care facility? The Shady Oaks retirement home?" "You do, Elena," Teresa said, weeping. "You've paid every bill for the last 3 years, even the extra physical therapy." A gasp went through the courtroom. "And Mark?" Elena asked. "Has he contributed?" "No," Teresa whispered. He borrowed money from me 2 years ago. He said he needed it for an investment. He took my savings, $40,000. He never paid it back." Mark slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. It was the final nail in the coffin. He wasn't just a cheater and a liar. He was a thief who stole from his own mother. Judge Blackwell looked at Mark with pure disgust. She didn't even look at her notes. She just stared at him. "I have heard enough," the judge said, slamming the file shut. "Stand up, Mr. Dameron." Mark stood, his legs wobbling. "It is the judgment of this court," Blackwell began, her voice ringing out like a bell, "that the prenuptial agreement is valid and binding. Mrs. Dameron owes you nothing. Furthermore," she leaned over the bench, "finding that you have committed perjury regarding your finances, and seeing evidence of financial abuse toward a vulnerable elder, I am forwarding the transcript of this trial to the district attorney's office. You aren't just leaving here divorced, Mr. Dameron. You are leaving here under criminal investigation." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Bang! "Court is adjourned." Elena walked over to Teresa, hugging her gently. She didn't even look at Mark. Mark stood alone as the bailiff moved toward him, handcuffs jingling on his belt. The realization hit him. He had walked in here expecting a paycheck. He was walking out in cuffs. But the story wasn't quite over. As Eleanor walked out of the courthouse, the paparazzi were waiting. The courthouse steps, usually a place of quiet exits, had transformed into a frenzy of flashing lights and shouting voices. Word had spread. The leak hadn't come from Eleanor's camp, but from the courtroom stenographer who had texted her sister. "You won't believe this. The broke wife is the owner of Vanguard Tech." By the time Mark was led out the side exit by 2 officers, the press was waiting. "Mr. Dameron, is it true you stole from your mother?" "Mark, how does it feel to fire yourself? Is it true you didn't know your wife was a billionaire?" Mark shielded his face with his handcuffed hands, the metal biting into his wrists. The shame was physical, a burning heat that radiated from his chest. He scanned the crowd, looking for one person. Chloe. She was supposed to be waiting in the parking lot. She had the keys to the BMW. She was his ride home. He spotted her. She was standing by the silver BMW 5 Series, her phone pressed to her ear. But she wasn't looking at him with concern. She was looking at him with disgust. "Chloe!" Mark shouted over the din of reporters. "Chloe, call a lawyer. Get the car." Chloe looked up. She saw the cameras. She saw the handcuffs. She saw the ruin of a man who was no longer a rising executive, but a national punchline. She didn't walk toward him. She opened the car door. "Chloe!" Mark yelled, panic setting in. Chloe rolled down the window as she started the engine. She shouted, loud enough for the nearest reporters to hear, "I'm not dating a criminal, Mark. And by the way, the lease on this car is in your name, but you missed the last 3 payments. I'm taking it to the dealership before they tow it." "No, Chloe, wait. I have clothes in the trunk." "Burn them!" she screamed, peeling out of the lot, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. The crowd laughed. It was a cruel, collective sound that echoed in Mark's ears as the officers shoved him into the back of a squad car. He watched the tail lights of the car, the symbol of the status he craved so desperately, disappear around the corner. While Mark was being processed at the county jail, his life was being dismantled in real time online. A TikTok video titled "The $4 billion Mistake" was trending #1 globally. It featured a dramatic reenactment of the courtroom scene. Strangers in comment sections were dissecting his life. User 123. Imagine fumbling a billionaire baddie because you wanted a girl with extensions. L. Justice for Elena. The mum part broke me. Who steals from their mum? Mark sat in the holding cell, staring at the concrete floor. His tie was gone. His shoelaces were gone. He had one phone call. He dialed his friend, Brad, the guy he went golfing with every Sunday. The guy who always said, "Bro, we're brothers." "Hello?" Brad answered. "Brad, it's Mark. I'm in a jam. I need bail money. It's set at 50,000. There was a long pause. "Mark, dude, I saw the news. My wife says I can't talk to you anymore." "What? Brad, come on, it's me." "You stole from your mom, man." Brad's voice was cold. "That's low. And hey, don't call this number again. I'm trying to get a job at Apex Global, and I don't need them seeing your name on my call log." Click. Mark lowered the phone. He was truly, completely alone. Meanwhile, across the city, the atmosphere was very different. Elena sat in the back of a black Maybach, watching the city lights blur by. She had removed the severe bun, letting her dark hair fall in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, lighter. "We have a problem, Mrs. Vance," Harrison Thorne said from the front seat, looking at his tablet. "What is it?" "The board. They want you to make a statement. The stock is volatile. People are confused. They want to know if the leadership is stable." Elena sighed. "Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning, at the headquarters. I'm done hiding in the shadows, Harrison. It's time I took my chair." "And Mark?" Harrison asked. "Sterling is trying to cut a deal for him. Avoid jail time in exchange for community service and repayment." Elena looked out the window. "Let the DA handle him. I don't care anymore. He's just a bad memory." But as the car turned toward her penthouse, a property Mark didn't even know existed, Elena felt a strange emptiness. She had won. She had crushed her enemies. But the victory felt hollow. She had spent 5 years pretending to be small to test a man's love, and the result was that she was alone. "Harrison," she said softly. "Yes, Mom." "Find me the best architect in the city. I want to build something, a shelter, for women starting over. Consider it done." The charity gala for the Vance Foundation was the event of the season. The ballroom of the Seattle Grand Hotel was draped in gold and velvet. The air smelled of expensive champagne and orchids. Elena stood on the balcony, looking down at the sea of elites. She wore a midnight blue gown that shimmered like the night sky. She was no longer the plain wife. She was Elena Vance, the titan of tech, the woman who had turned a scandal into a movement. "Heavy is the head that wears the crown," a voice said beside her. Elena turned. Standing there was a man she didn't recognize, which was rare. He was tall, with kind eyes, and a rugged jawline that suggested he spent more time outdoors than in boardrooms. He held 2 flutes of champagne. "I'm Liam," he said, offering her a glass. "Liam Cross." Elena took the glass. "The Liam Cross? Cross-border medical?" He smiled. "Guilty. I read about your new shelter, the Second Chance Initiative. It's impressive work. Most people in your position just write a check. You actually designed the blueprints." "I like to be hands-on," Elena said. "It keeps me grounded." "I heard," Liam said, his gaze intensifying. "I also heard you have a strict no-liars policy." Elena laughed, a genuine sound she hadn't made in years. "It's the only rule I have." "Good." Liam clinked his glass against hers. "Then I'll be honest. I didn't come to this gala for the champagne. I came because I wanted to meet the woman who took down a corrupt judge and a bad husband in the same afternoon without raising her voice. That's rare." For the first time in a long time, Elena didn't feel like a target. She felt seen. "Care to dance, Mr. Cross?" she asked. "I have 2 left feet," Liam admitted. "But for you, I'll risk stepping on a toe." As they moved to the dance floor, the cameras flashed. But this time, the headlines wouldn't be about a victim. They would be about a power couple in the making. 5 miles away, the rain was pouring down on a grimy street in the industrial district. Mark Dameron pulled the hood of his jacket up against the downpour. He adjusted the heavy bag of food delivery orders on his back. The bicycle seat was wet and uncomfortable. He had pleaded guilty. He avoided prison by the skin of his teeth, thanks to a public defender who took pity on him. But the sentence was brutal. 500 hours of community service, full restitution to his mother, which meant selling everything he owned, and a felony record for fraud that made him untouchable to any corporate employer. He was working for a food delivery app now. Zip Eats. His phone buzzed. A new order. Customer. Penthouse B, the Sterling Tower. Mark's stomach dropped. That was his old lawyer's building. The irony was suffocating. He pedaled through the rain, his legs burning. He arrived at the tower, dripping wet, shivering. The doorman looked at him with disdain. "Delivery entrance around back." Mark trudged to the back, took the service elevator up. He walked down the plush hallway, the smell of expensive leather reminding him of the life he used to have. He knocked on the door. It opened. It wasn't the lawyer, it was Chloe. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine. She looked at him. He looked at her. Mark stood there, water dripping from his nose onto the doormat. "Here's your pad thai." Chloe stared. Her eyes widened in recognition. Then, slowly, a cruel smile spread across her face. "Mark?" She laughed. "Oh my God, you're the delivery boy." "Just take the food, Chloe," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "Babe! Come look at this!" Chloe yelled into the apartment. A man walked up behind her. It was Arthur Sterling, the lawyer who had abandoned him. "Well, well," Sterling smirked, tightening his robe. "If it isn't the client of the century, keep the change, Mark. You look like you need it." Sterling tossed a crumpled $5 bill at Mark. It hit his chest and fell to the wet floor. Chloe laughed again as Sterling slammed the door in his face. Mark stood alone in the hallway. He looked down at the $5 bill. He remembered the day he threw a 20 at Elena for groceries. He remembered mocking her shoes. He remembered telling her she was useless. Slowly, painfully, he bent down and picked up the bill. He needed it. He needed it to buy a sandwich for dinner. He walked back to the service elevator, the weight of his karma crushing him. As the doors closed, he saw a TV screen in the lobby. It was the news. Billionaire Elena Vance spotted with philanthropist Liam Cross at the charity gala. Sources say it's a match made in heaven. On the screen, Elena was glowing. She looked happy. She looked free. Mark leaned his head against the cold metal wall of the elevator and closed his eyes. He had held a diamond in his hands, and he had thrown it away because he thought it was just glass. The elevator dinged. Ground floor. Mark stepped out into the rain, got back on his bike, and pedaled into the darkness. The Seattle skyline had changed. New towers of glass and steel pierced the clouds, reflecting the grey waters of the Puget Sound. The tallest among them was the Vance Cross Tower, a beacon of modern architecture and the new headquarters for the merged empire of Apex Global and Cross Border Medical. On the street level, the air was cold and damp. Mark Dameron pulled the collar of his worn-out utility jacket tighter around his neck. He wasn't delivering food anymore. His knees had given out from the biking. Now he worked for the city, sweeping trash from the gutters of the downtown district. It was a union job, steady, but it was invisible work. People walked past him without seeing him, their eyes glued to their phones or the horizon. He was invisible, just like he had once wished Eleanor to be. Mark paused to lean on his broom, catching his breath. He looked up. A massive crowd had gathered outside the new tower. Barricades were set up, and a red carpet was rolled out onto the wet pavement. "What's going on?" Mark asked a passing pedestrian. The woman didn't stop, just gestured vaguely. "Grand opening of the new children's hospital wing. The CEO is cutting the ribbon." Mark's heart gave a painful thud. He knew who the CEO was. He couldn't help himself. Like a moth drawn to a flame that had already burned him, he moved toward the crowd. He pushed his way to the front of the barricade, ignoring the dirty looks from people in expensive coats who brushed against his work uniform. "Here she comes!" someone shouted. A line of black SUVs pulled up. Security guards with earpieces swarmed the sidewalk. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and Liam Cross stepped out, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit. He turned and offered his hand to the woman inside. Elena stepped out. Mark felt the breath leave his lungs. She was radiant. She was 40 now, but she looked better than she ever had at 25. She wore a cream-colored coat and held a toddler, a little girl with curly hair, on her hip. She was laughing at something Liam said, her face glowing with a peace Mark had never seen. The cameras flashed in a blinding strobe. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Cross, is it true this wing is dedicated to single mothers?" "Elena, over here!" Mark gripped the metal barricade until his knuckles turned white. He was 10 feet away. Just 10 feet. The woman who used to fold his laundry. The woman who used to beg him to watch a movie with her. A sudden, desperate impulse seized him. He didn't want money. He didn't want a job. He just wanted her to see him. He wanted to know that he still existed in her world, even as a villain. Being hated was better than being forgotten. "Elena!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "Elena!" The crowd was loud, but his voice was desperate enough to cut through. Elena stopped. She turned her head, scanning the crowd. Mark's heart hammered. "It's me! Mark!" he yelled, waving a gloved hand. Elena's eyes swept over the sea of faces. For a split second, her gaze landed on him. Mark held his breath, waiting for the anger, the disgust, the recognition. But her eyes didn't stop. They slid right past him, as if he were part of the scenery, as if he were just a lamppost or a fire hydrant. There was zero recognition, no spark of hate, no flicker of memory. She turned back to Liam, adjusted the baby on her hip, and smiled. "I thought I heard something," she said, her voice picked up by a nearby microphone. "Must have been the wind." "Ready?" Liam asked, placing a hand on her back. "Ready," Elena said. She walked up the stairs, cut the ribbon, and disappeared inside the golden warmth of the tower she built. Mark stood frozen at the barricade. The rain began to fall harder, soaking his city uniform. The realization hit him harder than the judge's gavel had 5 years ago. He hadn't just lost her. He had been erased. He was so insignificant to her life now that she literally didn't see him standing right in front of her. "Hey, buddy," a security guard tapped Mark's shoulder. "Move along. You're blocking the exit." Mark looked at the guard. He looked at the tower. I used to know her," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. The guard laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure, pal. And I used to know the president. Move along." Mark turned around. He picked up his broom and his trash bag. He walked away from the lights, away from the warmth, and back into the cold, grey anonymity of the city. He had spent his life chasing status, thinking it made him a somebody. But in the end, his arrogance had turned him into nobody. And as he swept the wet pavement, washing away the dirt of the city, he realized he was finally cleaning up his own mess. Mark Dameron learned the hardest lesson of all. True value isn't found in a bank account, but in character. He spent years searching for a better life, only to realize he had everything he needed right in front of him, until he broke it. Elena didn't just win a court case, she won her freedom from a man who never deserved her. Her ultimate victory wasn't her billions, or her building, or even her new marriage. It was the peace of mind that allowed her to look at the man who destroyed her and see nothing but a stranger. It serves as a powerful reminder to us all. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder of success, because you never know who you might need on your way down. What do you think? Was Eleanor's silence the ultimate revenge, or should she have acknowledged him one last time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us create more dramas like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.